Wyoming Territory, August 1881. The sun had barely cleared the edge of the Medicine Bow Mountains when Colson Tate stepped into his barn and found a woman curled up in the hay like she had not planned on waking. She was asleep, half covered by his horse blanket, hair the color of river mud tangled around her face. Her dress was torn at the hem, her boots scuffed near through. She looked young, maybe 20, and bone-tired. He took one step closer and the floor creaked beneath his boot. Her eyes flew open. They were wide, dark green, and frightened. Colson held up both hands. "You are safe, I promise." She scrambled up to sitting, hay clinging to her sleeves. "I did not mean to trespass," she said quickly. I was walking for too long and I saw the barn and I thought I could rest just a little." "You walked here?" he asked, voice low, steady. "From where?" She looked down. "Fort Bridger, started out from there." "I was trying to get to Cheyenne." "That is over 100 miles, he said, brows pulling together. "You walked from Fort Bridger?" She nodded once. "I did not have a choice." Colson saw now how thin she was. Her dress hung wrong on her, like it had once fit and did not anymore. Her lips were dry, her hands scraped. He knelt beside her in the hay. "What is your name?" "Tess," she said. "Tess Darnell. I am Colson Tate." He paused. "You are not in trouble." Tess blinked fast, but her chin came up. "Then why do you look at me like I might break?" "Because I have seen what people look like after they have been through something they should not have had to survive," he said simply. "You are not the first." She stared at him, then looked away. "There was a man. I thought I could trust him. He said he would take me to Cheyenne. I was going to work at a boarding house there, but he left me 2 days in. Took my bag, my money, everything." Colson's jaw tightened. "So you walked, alone?" She nodded, eyes glassy. "You are safe now," he said again. "You can come inside, eat something. Rest proper." Tess hesitated. "You live alone?" He stood, brushed hay from his pants. "Just me and the horses." She looked up at him, then slowly stood too. "All right." Colson's cabin was small but neat. Rough-hewn wood walls, a stove that still held the morning's heat, a pine table with 2 chairs. Tess sat gingerly while he poured water into a tin cup and set it in front of her. "You can wash after you eat," he said. "Got stew left from last night." She nodded, both hands curling around the cup. He warmed the stew, set it in front of her with a hunk of bread. She whispered a thank you before she started eating, and he sat at the other end of the table, watching her with quiet eyes. She ate like someone who had not had a decent meal in days, which he figured was the truth of it. "I do not know where I am supposed to go now," she said after a while, voice low. "You do not have to know today," he said. She looked up, surprised. "You are not sending me off?" "No," he said. "I do not send people back out into the world when they clearly need rest." She blinked hard, then nodded. "Thank you." He nodded back. By the 3rd day, Tess had color in her face again. She had let him trim her hair at the ends where it was too tangled to save, and she wore one of his old shirts tied at the waist and her own skirt, washed and mended. She helped him feed the horses without him asking. She did not talk much, but when she did, it was soft and kind. That night they sat on the porch after supper. The wind was cool. The mountains were dark blue in the distance. "You really never married?" she asked, not looking at him. Colson shook his head. "Thought about it once. She married someone else." Tess was quiet a moment. "I was supposed to marry a man in Missouri, but he died in a mining accident before I got there." He looked at her then. "I am sorry," she nodded. "I never even met him, just letters, but I still cried." He was watching her hands, the way they twisted in her lap. "You are not alone anymore, Tess." Her breath caught just a little. She looked at him, really looked. "You are kind, Colson." His voice was quiet. "You make it easy." She smiled then, and it was small but real. That night he found her asleep in the hay again. She had gone out to check the horses and must have curled up there, blanket around her shoulders, curled like a child in the corner stall. He walked in with the lantern, heart tugging at the sight of her. He knelt. "Tess!" Her eyes opened slowly. She blinked up at him, then sat up quick. "I am sorry, I did not mean to." He touched her shoulder gently. "No need to be sorry, just wanted to make sure you were all right." She nodded, breath shaking. "I feel safest here sometimes, in the quiet." He helped her stand. She leaned into him a little without meaning to, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. Her head rested against his chest. "I do not know how you make me feel safe," she whispered, "but you do." He looked down at her. "Because you are safe, and you always will be with me." She looked up. Her eyes searched his, and then she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. He froze. She pulled back, embarrassed. "I should not have," but he cupped her face, leaned down, and kissed her gently. Her hands caught his shirt, holding tight. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "I do not want to leave." His voice was thick. "Then do not." She nodded slowly, eyes shining. "All right." And he knew in that moment he never wanted her to go. The next morning, Tess woke to the sound of quiet chopping. She stepped into the yard, boots sinking into the damp earth where dew still clung to the grass, and found Colson splitting wood beneath the cottonwoods. He worked with calm precision, lift, swing, split his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, shoulders moving like he was born to the rhythm. She didn't speak, only watched for a while, arms crossed against the chill. The air smelled of pine sap and smoke. "You're up early," he said without looking. "I heard the axe," she said. "Didn't want to sleep through your whole day." He set the log aside and wiped his hands on his pants. "You didn't have to come out here, I know, I wanted to." His eyes warmed at that, and he nodded toward the porch. "Coffee's on the stove, should still be hot." She didn't move. "Do you always live this quiet?" "Most days," he said. "Some winters I go weeks without seeing anyone but the post driver." Her lips pressed together, thoughtful. "Does it get lonely?" He considered for a moment. "Used to, not lately." She looked down, fingers brushing the side seam of her skirt. He stepped closer, slowing. "Come spring, I was thinking about adding a second room. Never had much reason till now." Her breath caught, but she didn't pull back. "You'd build it yourself. I've got the tools, just need to mill enough pine. Figure I could start once the snow's gone." She looked up at him, eyes searching. "Why tell me that?" "Because I don't want you wondering if this is temporary." She swallowed, voice thin. "It's hard to believe it could be anything else." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers closing gently over hers. "You're here." "That's enough for me." She didn't speak, but her hand stayed in his. Later they rode out to the far pasture where his yearling colts were kept. She sat astride the mare he'd trained last spring, back straight despite her nerves. He stayed close, guiding only when she asked, watching as she eased into the rhythm of the saddle. "I used to ride with my father," she said as they dismounted. "He worked cattle along the Missouri. Not his own stock, but he treated them like they were." "What happened to him?" Colson asked, careful. She knelt to check the mare's girth strap. "Fever. Took him one summer when I was 12. Mama died the next year. After that, I lived with an aunt who didn't really want me." He waited. "She married me off as soon as she could. To a man old enough to be my grandfather. I ran the second night, made it all the way to Kansas before anyone noticed." "That's how you ended up at Fort Bridger," he said quietly. She nodded. "I've been running ever since." He stepped beside her, not touching. "Then maybe it's time to stop." She looked at him, something cautious and aching in her expression. "I don't know how." He tilted his head toward the hills. "You start by planting your feet." That night, she cooked for the first time in his kitchen. She found a tin of dried apples and cut them into a pot with flour and lard, shaping something like a pie with rough edges and a browned crust. They ate it by lamplight, knees brushing beneath the table. "You ever think about what you'd be if life had gone differently?" she asked. He leaned back, chewing. "Maybe a smith. I like working with my hands. You," she traced the rim of her cup. "I used to want to teach. I had a book of letters, taught myself to read from it." "You still have it," she shook her head. "Left it behind in Missouri." He stood and crossed the room. From a shelf above the stove, he pulled down a cloth-wrapped bundle. "That why you kept looking at this?" She blinked, surprised. "I didn't mean to." He unwrapped it. A worn primer, pages yellowed, the spine cracked but intact. "My mother's," he said. "She taught me before she passed." Tess reached out, fingers brushing the cover like it might vanish. "May I?" He passed it to her. She held it like something sacred. "You can keep it," he said, her eyes lifted wide. "You don't have to, I want to. You should have something that's yours." She pressed it to her chest. You keep giving me things I didn't think I was allowed to want." He didn't answer, just looked at her like he meant every word. She stood and crossed to him, slow, quiet. When she reached him, she set the book on the table and reached for his hand. "You're the first man who ever gave me a choice," she whispered. He bent his head, voice steady. "Then choose me," she nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I already have," she said. The snow came early that year, quiet and steady, laying down over the land like a heavy quilt. Come November, the pastures were pale and still, the fence posts capped white, and the mountains behind the Tate homestead sat draped in their winter coats. Colson woke before first light most mornings, and Tess was usually not far behind, wrapping herself in the wool shawl she'd sewn from an old blanket, moving around the cabin like she belonged there. She did, he thought more often than he said. That morning, with the stove burning low and the wind whispering through the chinks in the wall, Tess was bent over a length of muslin at the table, brow furrowed. "You making something?" Colson asked, pouring hot water into the basin by the door, her eyes stayed on her stitching. "Curtains," he dried his hands. "I thought you said the old ones were fine. They were borrowed," she said, voice even. "A home ought to have something made for it." He crossed the room and rested a hand on her shoulder. She didn't look up, but he felt the way she leaned slightly into his touch. "You've got a way of turning plain things into something warm," he said. Her needle paused. "I never had the chance to make anything last before." He let that settle between them, then pressed a kiss to her temple and stepped out into the cold. The sky was the color of pewter and the horses huffed steam into the air. As he forked hay into the trough, he heard the crunch of boots behind him. "Thought you'd be inside," he called without turning. "I wanted to ask you something," Tess said, voice muffled by her scarf. He turned. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her hair tucked in a loose braid beneath her bonnet. "There's a woman in town," she said. "Mrs. Whitley, the one who runs the dry goods. She told me last week she needs help with her books. Said she'd teach me if I knew my letters." "You're thinking of working there?" Colson asked. Tess nodded. "Only a few days a week. She said I could walk in with the mail cart every Monday and stay with her sister overnight if the weather turns." Colson studied her face. There was no fear in it. "Only quiet resolve. You want to do this?" "I do," she said. "Not because I need to, because I can." He stepped toward her, pulling off his gloves. "You don't have to ask my permission, Tess." "I know," she said. "But I wanted to ask your blessing." He reached for her hands, held them between his. "You've got it." That night they sat near the stove, the last of the curtain fabric resting in her lap. Colson was whittling a strip of pine into what would become a drawer handle for her sewing chest. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. "Do you miss anything?" Tess asked softly. He looked up. "From before," she nodded. He considered. "I miss the smell of my mother's bread. She always baked with molasses, and I miss the way my father used to hum when he worked." "Never could figure the tune." She smiled a little. "I miss the sound of the river near our house. It froze solid every winter, but in spring it would rush so loud I could hear it from my bed." She folded the fabric neatly beside her. "I want to remember those things. But I don't want to live in them anymore." "You don't have to," he said. "You've got new things now." She looked at him for a long moment, then stood and crossed the room. She knelt beside his chair, one hand resting over his. "I've never had a home I helped build," she said. "Not until now." Colson set the carving aside and drew her close, her head against his chest, his arms wrapped around her like they'd always meant to fit that way. "You helped build this one from the moment you stepped inside," he said. She tilted her face up and he kissed her slow, the way a man kisses what he's sure of. When they parted, she stayed pressed against him, her breath warm against his neck. "Next spring," she said, "I want to plant a garden." "Then we will," he said. "And I want to hang those curtains in a room of our own." His hand found hers, fingers lacing. "We'll build it together." Outside, the wind howled and the snow kept falling, but inside the cabin there was only warmth, the steady hush of two hearts no longer running. By late January, the cabin stood wrapped in silence, the sort that came only with deep snow and days too cold for much talk. The fire snapped low in the hearth while Tess mended the shoulder seam of Colson's work coat, the lantern's glow brushing her face in soft gold. He sat across from her, sharpening the drawknife he'd used come spring. The quiet between them had settled into something comfortable, like breathing. He watched her fingers move, steady and sure. "You ever think about having animals besides horses?" she asked, not looking up. He paused his work. "Wasn't much reason, just me here. Chickens maybe if we build a coop come thaw," she nodded. "I could keep hens, gather eggs, maybe dry some herbs for winter." "You thinking of staying that long?" he asked, though his voice held no doubt. She met his eyes. "I'm not thinking of leaving." He set the blade aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I could clear more land come summer, enough for a few rows of beans. Maybe corn. If you're wanting a garden, it'd be good to start with soil that hasn't been run over by stock." Tess folded the coat and set it aside. "I'd like that. I was thinking, too, about saving for a spinning wheel, if I work steady for Mrs. Whitley. I could manage it before next winter." "That's something you've done before," my mother taught me. "Wasn't much else to do in the evenings once the light went." Colson looked toward the window where frost clung to the glass in delicate ferns. "Could build a frame loom too if you wanted." "I remember my uncle had one, took up half the parlor." "I'd like to try," she said. "Feels good to think ahead." He nodded once, then stood and crossed to the hearth. He added a split log, then turned, resting his shoulder against the stone. "You ever miss the town?" She tilted her head. "Not like I thought I would. I miss hearing music sometimes. A fiddle, maybe." He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "I could ask around come spring. Someone in town might be willing to part with one." "I didn't say I could play it," she said, smiling faintly. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "You should have it if you want it." She stood slowly, walking toward him. The floor creaked under her steps, the kind of sound that felt like home. She stopped just in front of him, close enough that the warmth from the fire touched both of them. "I want to learn things," she said. "Not because I have to, but because I can. With you, I feel like there's time." "You've got all the time you want," he said. "I'll see to that." She reached up, hand brushing the edge of his collar. "I never thought I'd live anywhere long enough to plant anything. Or know someone long enough to miss them if they went away." "I'm not going anywhere," he said, voice quiet but sure. Tess's eyes searched his, then she nodded once and leaned in. He met her halfway, their kiss slow, the kind that built steady like embers catching in dry wood. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. Outside, wind moved through the pines, soft but steady. Inside, the world felt still. Later, as they lay beneath the quilt she'd pieced from scraps her side, warmed by his arm draped over her waist, Colson spoke into the hush. "There's a spot east of the pasture," he said. "Flat and open, close to water. I was thinking we could build something there next year." She turned toward him in the dark, her voice barely more than breath. "What kind of something?" "House," he said. "A real one. With a loft and a porch that faces west so we can watch the sun drop behind the hills." Tess was quiet for a long moment and he waited. Then, "I'd like to have a room with shelves, for books and dried herbs, maybe a cradle someday." He felt her hand find his, fingers sliding between his own. "We'll build that too," he said. She didn't answer, only pressed her cheek against his shoulder, her breath evening out. Colson lay awake a while longer, listening to the wind, the fire settling in the hearth, and the quiet breathing of the woman beside him. He thought of the first morning he'd found her in the hay, small and worn and ready to run. And he thought of now her hand in his, her voice steady, her dreams beginning to take shape. He'd never asked for much from the world. But tonight, with her warmth beside him and the scent of pine smoke in the air, he reckoned he had everything he'd ever needed. The thaw came slow and stubborn, April dragging its feet through snowmelt and mud. Ice pulled back from the creek edge by edge, and the cottonwoods near the barn dropped their last brittle leaves to make way for new ones. Colson had taken to checking the fence lines every afternoon, boots sinking into soft earth, his coat hanging open for the first time in months. Tess stood at the edge of the garden plot, sleeves rolled, palms stained with loam. The soil was still cool, but she tested its readiness the way her father had taught her, pressing it into a ball, watching how it crumbled. She turned when Colson stepped up beside her, his boots caked in mud, his brow damp. "Pine up by the ridges looking good," he said. "Straight trunks, tight grain. Enough for a frame?" she asked, brushing her hands off on her skirt. He nodded. "I'll start felling end of the week." Her mouth turned thoughtful. "I've been thinking about the hearth. I'd like it at the center, not tucked to one side." "You want it warm everywhere," he said. "And I want to be able to cook from both ends of the stove," she added. "If we're building it new, might as well build it right." They walked back toward the barn together, the sun high enough to cast their shadows long. Tess paused at the door and looked out over the field. "Mrs. Whitley sent a parcel," she said. "Said her cousin has a loom she's not using. Wants to give it to me." Colson leaned against the post. "That's something you want." "I do," she said, "but I don't want it out of pity." "She's not offering out of pity," he said. "She likes you, sees what you can do." Tess was quiet a moment. "I never thought I'd be known for anything honest." "Just surviving." "You're not just surviving anymore." She looked at him then, something steady in her face. "No, I'm not." That evening, Tess spread seed packets across the kitchen table, beans, squash, cabbage, and began planting rows with a pencil Colson had whittled down to half its size. He watched her from across the room as he patched the shoulder of his second-best shirt. When she looked up, her expression shifted. "I got a letter," she said, "from the woman in Missouri who runs the boarding house. She said the job's still open if I want it." Colson set the shirt down. "You thinking of taking it?" She shook her head. "I wanted to know how it felt, to say no." He crossed the room and sat beside her. "How did it feel?" "Like I've got a future that isn't borrowed." He reached for her hand, fingers brushing the inside of her wrist. "You do." That night they lay side by side, the quilt pushed low, the windows cracked to let in the scent of thawing earth. Tess traced the lines of Colson's forearm in the dark, her voice soft. "I want to marry you." His breath caught. "I don't care if it's a church wedding or just us under the cottonwoods," she went on. "I want to be your wife. I want to build that house with you. Plant that garden. Wake up every morning and see your face before the sun." He turned onto his side, hand cupping her jaw. "You sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He kissed her then, slow and certain, his hand sliding to the back of her neck. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "We'll marry next Sunday," he whispered. "The thaw'll hold by then. We'll stand under those trees, and I'll say yes to you every day after." The morning of their wedding dawned clean and bright, the last of the frost burned off by sun before noon. Tess wore a dress she'd sewn from calico gifted by Mrs. Whitley, simple and soft, her hair pinned back with the bone comb Colson had carved through the long winter. He wore his dark coat, the one he only ever used for town, and a white collar Tess had stitched herself. They stood beneath the cottonwoods, watched by half a dozen neighbors and the creek beyond, and spoke their vows with quiet voices and full hearts. There was no preacher, only the words they gave each other, steady, plain, and true. After, they walked back to the house hand in hand. The sun was warm on their backs, the path dry beneath their boots. That evening they danced in the kitchen, her feet bare, his boots scuffed, the lantern swinging gently overhead. He hummed a melody he half remembered from his father, and she followed without missing a step. Spring settled in like breath returning. The foundation of the new house went down by May, and by the end of June the frame stood tall, the beams joined tight by Colson's hand and Tess's eye. She planted her garden in neat rows, and before long, beans curled up the trellis he built her. The loom arrived by wagon in July, and she set it up by the west-facing window, where the light stayed longest. Her first weaving was rough, but her second held strong, and by autumn, she'd sold 2 lengths of wool to a passing trader who said her work was finer than anything he'd found east of Denver. Colson built the cradle before the first frost. He didn't say why, but she knew. Their child came the following spring, born just after the apple trees bloomed. A girl, dark-haired and loud-voiced with eyes like her father's. They named her Mercy, for the thing that had brought Tess from the edge of nowhere into the center of a life worth keeping. One morning, years later, Tess stood on the porch watching Colson and Mercy walk back from the pasture, the child's hand swing hooked into her father's. The sky was clear, the light soft, and the world felt whole. She pressed a hand to her belly, where another child stirred beneath her ribs and smiled. Her heart, once scattered to the wind, had taken root. And where once there'd been silence and hunger and fear, there was now only the quiet certainty of love earned, kept, and never let go.